What's up, guys, and welcome to Gamescript. I'm going to be looking at the first Saturday game today between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's another game where we have two backup quarterbacks going off against each other, and I've been calling backup quarterbacks all season, and will there be one today? We'll find out after this. There is a ton of value in current underdog playoff best ball ADP. Elite offenses like the Bills are easy to stack. Take advantage of uncertainty and start drafting now. Use the promo code SEEK for up to $100 match on your first deposit. And subscribe to Heat Seeker Sports on YouTube for underdog strategy and drafting shows. Hey, what's up, guys? Simon Edwards at Pumacom here with Heat Seeker Sports. You're watching Gamescript. Today I'm going to be looking at the Cincinnati Bengals versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, looking at his 37.5 point total with the Steelers as 2.5 point dogs. And this is another one of those games where we have two backup quarterbacks facing off against each other. Mason Rudolph is going to be stepping in for Kenny Pickett, and we got Jake Browning stepping in for Joe Burrow. So it's a game with a lot of injuries affecting this game. Ja'Marr Chase is out. On the Pittsburgh side, we're missing more of their secondary with Minkah Fitzpatrick and Demontre Kazi are going to be both out. And then on top of that, we have another member of their secondary out with Trenton Thompson. So it's going to be a injury-riddled game. And Pittsburgh has already been rough in the secondary, and now they're going to be missing even more. And it's going to be against Jake Browning, who has been pretty good lately. He only had one really bad game, and that came against the Bengals. The Steelers in their first matchup. So I'll get into that in a second. But before I do that, make sure to hit the like button, looking for 15 likes to put out a shorter video closer to lock. And make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Going to be putting out another show for another showdown, the second game of the Saturday slate in a little while. But also going to be putting out a 2-game slate breakdown before the games start. Tomorrow, you're going to want to make sure to put your alerts on so you get an alert when those shows are posted. And been having a lot of success with these showdowns with these backup quarterbacks lately. Been hitting on the ones that have hit and skipping on the ones that have not hit. So it's been very good with that lately. And we got another situation where I think we can find some sneaky stuff to look at with Mason Rudolph. And before I even get into that, make sure to sign up for Underdog. They're running a promotion with me where if you use the promo code SEEK, that's SEEK, like Heat Seekers, got it on the bottom corner of the screen. If you use that promo code SEEK when you make your first deposit on Underdog for a new account, then they will match you up to $100. So if you deposit $100, they'll match you up to that $100. So it's a really good deal there, and I'm finding a bunch of value on that. I found the Rams, talked about the Rams in a couple shows, and the Rams just basically sealed their playoff berth almost. They're about a 75% chance of making the playoffs now, and we were getting those high-powered offense players at a steal in best ball drafts, and there's still a ton of value out there. So make sure to check out my best ball shows, playoff best ball shows, and check those out and sign up for that Underdog account. So let's get into this breakdown. Looking at Ja'Marr Chase, who is out. That's going to be big for Tee Higgins. Tee Higgins already gets about 25% target share in man coverage, and Pittsburgh likes to run man coverage at the 6th highest rate. And Tee Higgins is the only target that Jake Browning is going to have. And only reliable target that he's going to have. He got 8 targets last week. He made an awesome touchdown grab in that game, one of the best of the season. And he scored 22 DraftKings points in that game. He's been very up and down this season. He's had only 3 games over 20 DraftKings points, and he's had mixed results throughout the rest of the season. But he is the only real target that Jake Browning is going to have on Saturday, and that makes Tee Higgins a great play on Saturday. And Tee Higgins is also up against that weakened, depleted Pittsburgh secondary. If you look at the matchup, Pittsburgh's secondary has only given up 6.9 DraftKings points a game to wideouts, though. So that is the only thing that I would be concerned about in this matchup. Even though players are missing, Mike Tomlin's defensive scheme that they're using is still going to be like effective against the wide receivers, so wide out. So keep that in mind. But Tee Higgins has an elevated matchup against the Steelers with all the injuries to the Bengals and the Steelers affecting him positively. So let's move on to Joe Mixon. The Steelers have not been very good against the running backs this season. They're giving up 23.9 DraftKings points a game to the running backs, but Joe Mixon has been losing share of that backfield. And if you watched this show, you were well aware of Chase Brown before he hit a couple weeks ago, because on that show on Sunday, I touted him as a guy to target as a near min price running back, and he ended up scoring 19 DraftKings points that week. Noticed him in the showdown before that game, and he was getting a lot of that work. I saw the beat writers had been talking him up prior to that showdown game, and I ended up sprinkling him into some lineups, even though I'd never heard of the guy. But the beat writers were really high on him, and Joe Mixon has been super inefficient lately. And there was a lot of talk locally about giving Chase Brown opportunities, and then he was coming off injury on top of that. He got his opportunity in that game, and he blew away expectations. He was looking like the starting running back in the beginning of that game before he even broke out. And then Mixon came in, and he ended up scoring a couple touchdowns. That was in this Jacksonville game, I believe. And so Mixon came in, ended up scoring a couple touchdowns, taking away some of the thunder of Chase Brown, which was great for the next week when they faced off against Indy, because that gave us a low-owned Chase Brown on the main slate. And Chase Brown ended up getting a pretty decent score on that main slate, too. He ended up getting 19.5 DraftKings points. So that's the week that, I was saying to start him. He ended up 19.5 DraftKings points on low ownership and a low salary. And today, on Saturday, he's going to have a $5,600 salary. So he's creeping up there, which is to be expected. But Chase Brown, I still like him. And I like him in this matchup against the Steelers, especially with them giving up 23.9 DraftKings points a game. I think I'd lean Chase Brown over Mixon. Mixon is much more expensive at 10.4, and I think that Chase Brown is a guy that is plugging away on that share of the backfield, and he is doing a good job with the opportunity that he's getting. So Chase Brown is going to be an interesting play this week, especially with the workload that he's getting recently. So moving on from Mixon, we got Browning. 10K going off against Pittsburgh. Last game against Pittsburgh only had 13 DraftKings points, but that was when he unexpectedly got the role as the Cincinnati quarterback. So now that he's had a few games under his belt, he scored 30 DraftKings points against Jacksonville, 25 against Indy, and 23 against Minnesota. But he's up against a tough defense in the Steelers, and the Steelers are only giving up 14.9 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position since week 6, and that makes them a difficult matchup. It's a matchup that favors running backs and tight ends much more than it does for the quarterbacks and their wideouts. So Jake Browning, he could have a decent game, but it's going to be a tough matchup, and it's going to be tough for him to pull it off. They're playing at Pittsburgh, too, on top of it, and I believe there's going to be potential weather issues, according to this DraftKings icon there. I have to check into that a little bit more. Mason Rudolph is the backup of the Steelers, and he has a much better matchup than Chase than Jake Browning. He's got a matchup where the Bengals are giving up 21 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position. They're giving up 17.5 DraftKings points a game to the wideouts and 17 DraftKings points a game to the tight ends. So those are the strongest matchups on the Pittsburgh side this week. And honestly, they don't have any weak matchups because Pittsburgh's giving up 22.7 DraftKings points a game to running backs and 20.7 DraftKings points a game to the slot. All this is good for the Pittsburgh passing game. I think a lot of people are going to be on Jaylen Warren this week, which is also a good matchup. And Jaylen Warren has been getting a large part of that workload. And I think he basically took over as the main running back in that offense. And the Bengals have been very up and down against the running backs this season. So they're missing DJ Reader as well. So that is going to be a good matchup for the Pittsburgh running backs. And Bengals are allowing 4.5 yards per carry to running backs, which is among the worst in the league. But the Steelers have been vulnerable against the run as well, as I mentioned with Mixon. Guys like Zeke, Elliott, and a bunch of scrubs, Tyler Goodson and Trey Sermon, have all done well against this defense of the Bengals recently. So interesting matchups for the running backs, interesting matchups for the Pittsburgh passing game that we're seeing here. Diontae Johnson has been the favorite target of Mason Rudolph. And Diontae Johnson, he's got 3 weeks in a row with a touchdown. But look at the DraftKings points, 16, 15, and 13. So he hasn't really done too much there. But listen to these games that Diontae has had with Mason Rudolph. He had 13 targets, 7 receptions, 83 yards in the last game that they played together. Prior to that, 4 targets, 3 receptions, 96 yards, 9 targets, 8 receptions, 81 yards, and a touchdown. 6 targets, 4 receptions, 64 yards, no touchdowns. 2 targets, 1 reception, 3 yards. I think he might have been injured in that game. 7 targets, 5 receptions, 84 yards, and a touchdown. 8 targets, 5 receptions, 27 yards. 6 targets, 6 receptions, 77 yards, and a touchdown. And then 6 targets, 3 receptions, 52 yards, and a touchdown. So he's had pretty good games with Mason Rudolph as the quarterback. So I'm not really worried about giving him a downgrade. I think, if anything, Mason Rudolph is probably an upgrade over the quarterbacks that we've seen in Pittsburgh so far this season. And I would not be surprised if Diontae Johnson gets one of those 8 for 88 and a touchdown type of lines, which would give us over 20 DraftKings points in a matchup like this, especially against Cincinnati, which has been giving up a bunch of points to the passing games of their opponents recently. So Diontae Johnson is firmly in play. George Pickens, not so high on George Pickens. He's been getting a lot of shit from the coaching staff lately. Guy's just been lazy and complaining and just like a diva, and he hasn't really done anything to back it up. He's had a few good games. I would not be surprised, though, if this is a game where he can put up a decent fantasy score. But I don't know if the coaches are going to be leaning him. Like we saw what happened with Chase Claypool just a couple years ago. So don't be surprised if most of the work goes to Diontae Johnson. But George Pickens is not a guy that we want to necessarily sleep on. But Diontae Johnson is where I'm leaning in this passing game. And especially when you look at their 2 salaries, Diontae is only $600 more than Pickens. And I will take Diontae, even though Diontae has been, complaining recently too, but not as bad as Pickens. And he's not been lazy with blocking and stuff like that, like Pickens has. So Pickens is either going to have one of those weeks where he wakes up or he just goes the Chase Claypool route. So we'll see what happens there. Tyler Boyd, another beneficiary of man coverage. He gets a decent target share in man coverage, but he's also one of the guys that was getting targeted once Jamar Chase was out of the game last week. But it's Tyler Boyd. He's been super inconsistent all season, but we are missing Jamar Chase, so that opens the door for Tyler Boyd this week. Let's see. Najee Harris losing his work to Jaylen Warren and hasn't done much with the opportunities that he's gotten. 2 DraftKings points last week, 8 the week before that, 10 the week before that, and then he had 16. So he's been very he comes in spurts. Like he had that one spurt where he had 16 DraftKings points, 19 DraftKings points, and 16 DraftKings points within 4 weeks. But Jaylen Warren has been chipping away at that workload all season, and now it's looking like he's going to get an even bigger workload. So definitely leaning Warren over Harris, and Harris is 6,200, so he's not cheap on top of that. But he's a good guy when you get to that point where you're in need of a, like a salary swap in. Chase Brown, I like Chase Brown tonight on Saturday. He went 3 targets and 7 attempts versus Minnesota in a close game. Only put up 8 DraftKings points. Week before that, 8 attempts for 25 yards. But he's been making most of his damage in the passing game. 3 receptions, 3 targets, 3 receptions, 80 yards and a touchdown for 19.5 DraftKings points. But he's chipping away at that workload of Joe Mixon. And given the price discrepancy, 5,600 versus whatever Joe Mixon is, Mixon is at 10.4. Let's see what Mixon did last week. Mixon had only 10 attempts to that 8 attempts of Chase Brown, and then they both got 3 targets. So it's basically a split backfield if you're looking at the actual touches. So don't like that for Mixon versus Brown, but I do like their matchup, and I think you could use either guy, but I'm going to lean more towards Brown and taking that discount in the salary. Pat Freiermuth is another guy who should benefit from a switch to Mason Rudolph. I think Freiermuth he's done well versus Cincinnati in the past. I can give you some of the games against Cincinnati. Last game they played this season, he had 11 targets, 9 receptions, 120 yards. Prior to that, he had 12 targets, 8 receptions, 78 yards against Cincy, 10 targets, 5 receptions, 75 yards against Cincy. And then his rookie year, he had 4 targets, 4 receptions for 40 and a touchdown, 5 targets, 3 receptions, 22 and a touchdown. So he has scored decently against Cincinnati in every game that they've played against him. He's played against them. So it's always been a good matchup for Freiermuth. It's just a matter of what Rudolph is going to do with him. I think the last game that Freiermuth played with Rudolph, I don't know if he's played a game with Rudolph because I don't think he's started recently. Let me just double check that. I want to see what his situation is against Cincy with Freiermuth. Or let's see. We'll check his career starts here. So Mason Rudolph's last start was back in 2021, and it was a 16-16 tie against Detroit. If we look at that game log, we can see that Freiermuth had 9 targets, 5 receptions, 31 yards in that game. So Rudolph targeted him 9 times. In that game, Rudolph also targeted Ray McLeod 12 times. McLeod had 9 receptions for 63 yards, and that's the game where he targeted Diontae 13 times for 7 receptions and 83 yards. So Freiermuth was one of Rudolph's favorite targets the last time that Rudolph played, and the last time that Rudolph played was in that 2021 game. Prior to that 2021 game where Rudolph started, he had not played in 8. He had not started in 8 games. So gives you an idea. Like Rudolph, you can plug him in, and he can he can have like a decent performance even if he hasn't played in a while. And I would expect Freiermuth and Diontae to be his favorite targets, as well as the running backs. Last time Rudolph played against the running backs, he targeted them 16 times. So that was pretty far removed, but that was against a Lou Amarillo defense. So keep that in mind with Freiermuth and this Mason Rudolph matchup. Bengals D going against a backup, but going against a backup that doesn't have a lot of recent tape on him, I don't really subscribe to that too much in trying to project the defense to go off. Anything could happen with a backup. They could melt down and throw a bunch of interceptions, or they could play it super conservative, throw their check downs and their screen passes to guys like running backs, tight ends, and Diontae Johnson. But the Bengals D has not been very good this year, and they do have a few games over double-digit points, but they are kind of hit or miss, especially at 5,200. I don't like that salary on them at 5,200. I mean, that, like putting them at 50, putting a bad defense at 5,200 just because they're playing a backup quarterback is like not a recipe for success there if you're starting them in your lineups. Evan McPherson. I like Evan McPherson against a tough Pittsburgh pass rush who could get a little bit of pressure on Browning, force him into stalls, and maybe they stall out in the red zone a few times. Evan McPherson comes in and kicks some field goals. Plus, in a low total like this, maybe you can expect to see Evan McPherson get some opportunities. Same goes with Boswell, with another backup quarterback. Boswell has been pretty good this year, a bunch of weeks over double-digit points, and he's always been pretty consistent, and they always lean. They're never afraid to use Boswell as opposed to going for it in Pittsburgh. So I like him there. I like Tanner Hudson too. Tanner Hudson had a decent game last couple weeks. 5 targets last week, 3 targets week before that, 4 targets week before that, and 5 targets. So he's been getting targeted with Browning. So I do like Tanner Hudson in this matchup. I'm going to leave him in my player pool. And on top of that, Steelers have allowed 5 touchdowns to tight ends in the past 4 games. So they've been vulnerable to tight ends, and I like that situation for them. Steelers D. I might actually like the Steelers D more than I like the Bengals D, just because Browning has a lot of tape on him now. And the Steelers D, they have a great pass rush, but a depleted secondary. But again, they're running in that same scheme. So even with a depleted secondary, they could be in the right position to have success against Cincinnati. And if Jake Browning is feeling it, playing in Pittsburgh and, taking a little bit more shots than normal, and he doesn't have Jamar Chase there, if they're guarding Tee Higgins well, then that is not going to be a good recipe for success for Browning, and that could lead to some Steelers points. I like them a lot better at 4,000 on DraftKings. Robinson, I'm not really interested in there. Not interested in Irv Smith. Charlie Jones, don't have a lot of interest there. Although he could be sneaky with Jamar Chase out, but I don't like that 2,200 price tag. I much prefer Trenton Irwin at 1,600. Trenton Irwin hasn't done anything the last couple weeks, but that stretch where Tee Higgins was out, he got 5 targets and 4 targets for 13 DraftKings points and 6 DraftKings points. I would not be surprised to see Irwin get 6 targets on Saturday. Drew Sample, not really interested there. I think that Tanner Hudson has been emerging as the main tight end. And the last game that he played against Pittsburgh, he had 8 DraftKings points, scored a touchdown. But I do like Tanner Hudson better than Drew Sample. And I don't really like Drew Sample at all with that workload. I'd prefer Josephus, who is at 800. And he's going to have plenty of opportunity probably with Chase being out. Local beat writers been talking him up. a few times this season on where's his opportunities. Well, now he's going to get his opportunities. So he might be a good salary relief guy at 800 if we want to go dumpster diving. Other than that, I think that's the lowest I go for dumpster diving this week. I don't really see anyone else interesting. So let's go ahead and build these lineups. Before I do that, hit like on the video, looking for 15 so I can put out a shorter video tomorrow. I'll put out a short video for, my 2-game slate tomorrow. Just give me to 15, and like I'll do some showdown references in there. If we're starting here, also subscribe on the YouTube channel. I'm up to 240. I'm looking for 300 before the end of the season, so help me get that 300. And then again, reminder on Underdog, playoff best ball is here. You can make a deposit, open up an account, make your first deposit for $100. They'll match you up to $100. So with the price points of the tournaments for playoff best ball, we're talking $5 entries for the mitten, $25 entries for the gauntlet, and lots of value out there. I was calling on the Rams for one of the shows that I did recently, and now the Rams have a 75% chance of making the playoffs, 70, 75, somewhere in that range, and they are much more expensive than ADP than they were just yesterday. So I slowed down on drafting them since that happened, but I do see a bunch of other value on there. So use that promo code SEEK. It's on the bottom corner of the screen, whichever side. So make sure to use that promo code, and you'll get a $100 match on your first deposit on Underdog. All right, so captain, for the chalky build, they're putting in. I'm going to do the chalky build first. What the optimizer is giving us, they're putting in Browning. They like the Steelers D, who I also like. It's interesting that a optimizer is running a defense against a quarterback. And then they also got Tyler Boyd, Najee Harris. I don't like really either of those guys as much as other options, but I'll put them in. And then we got Jaylen Warren. And they got another running back in there. I'll let you use your imagination. So that's the chalkier build, and that's the situation that we have for them. If we X that out, let's move on to a build based on matchups here. And I think anyone is probably going to want to start with Tee Higgins as the captain. Not sure I like Browning this week. I don't like that matchup. But let's put Chase in there. Chase Brown. Let's get him in there because he's cheap. He's going to give us some salary relief. I like the passing game on the Pittsburgh side. So let's put in Mason Rudolph. You know what? I'm going to take Higgins out there. I'm going to put in Diontae Johnson just based on the history that he's had with Rudolph. And I'm going to get Freiermuth in there as well because I like the matchup there as well. This is with 9,400 per guy. That leaves us with easy access to Jaylen Warren, and that leaves us with 10-9. Now this flows just so easily. Like this build is so freaking easy that is probably going to be duplicated, but we'll use it as a a Christmas present. You can put Higgins in there and finish up that lineup. You can swap them out and put Mixon in there for an alternative. But that is a lineup that I really like. I think that lineup will do really well based on matchups. But we could see, like a low-scoring game. So let's build a scenario where we see. All right, I mean, even this works in a low-scoring game, but we could see like a kicker, defense style game. So let me get one for you guys with a, let's take out Chase Brown. Let's put in Evan McPherson. Let's say they don't convert in the red zone. But then, again, we're left in that situation. You can use Higgins, you can use Mixon, you can use Browning, right? And then you have 4-2 Pittsburgh builds, but I think I prefer 4-2 Pittsburgh builds given the matchup. And, Pittsburgh's going to have a much easier matchup than the Bengals. We've seen these backup quarterbacks pull it off recently. Mason Rudolph, another one of these veteran backup quarterbacks, the guy with experience. He knows how to read a defense, and the defense does not have a lot of recent tape on him, so he has an advantage there. They also have, playing in Pittsburgh, and we know how these Steelers play in Pittsburgh around playoff time. They always come through, and Mike Tomlin has a way of rallying the troops when they're down, and right now they are down, and I would not be surprised to see the troops get rallied here. I also don't hate swapping out Diontae with Tee Higgins and that captain. If we do that, leaves us with like Tyler Boyd. Let's swap that. Let's see what we can do here. If you want to get to Diontae, we need to get an extra. Let's take out McPherson. Let's put Diontae in there. That would leave us with 4K. That leaves you with the Steelers D as an option. I don't hate that. And really, Steelers D is the only one that I like in this range without leaving salary on the table. So it's not a bad situation there. That would be a 5-1 build, which I don't hate it given the situation that the Bengals are in. But, there's something like this. You could put in Trenton Irwin or Josephus. What is Irwin's price? Yeah, we're $600 off of Tanner Hudson, unfortunately. Trenton Irwin is $1,600. So you'd be leaving salary on the table, but you'd be giving yourself a second Bengal if you're not comfortable with a 5-1 build. I think I prefer Diontae in there. I like how that Diontae Johnson lineup. I might just put in 2 lineups this week with like that rotation I was talking about. So very good build. Builds itself pretty much, and I think you can do well with that. If you wanted to put in Jaylen Warren, a lot of people are going to like Jaylen Warren this week, so I'll give you guys an option for a build like that. If you put in Jaylen Warren and you put in Diontae, leaves you with 5,400, and you got McPherson as an option. You lose Chase Brown when you have Warren in that captain over Diontae, but it gives you the Bengals D. It gives you McPherson. It gives you Boswell. Gives you Hudson. Tons of options. Steelers. So works with Warren. Works with Diontae. I prefer Diontae as a captain this week, but you guys make up your own mind. And make sure to hit that like. Get me to 15 likes. I put out a short video for the 2-game slate. Get me a 300 subscribers. I'm at 240 now. Just need 60. And subscribe. Open up an account with Underdog. Open up an account. Make your first deposit of $100. They're going to match you on that $100 deposit for your first deposit if you're a new customer. And we're going to be building a ton of these playoff best ball lineups. Check out my previous 2 shows to get an idea of how to play the game. And I'll be putting out a bunch more of those shows as we get closer and closer to the playoffs, and we get even more secure in our picks of who is going to make it to the playoffs and what the matchups are going to look like. But I've been projecting my matchups and my projections for players going through the entire playoffs based on those projections, and that's how I've been drafting so far. And I've been drafting a ton of Rams. I think I had like 62% Puka Nacua exposure, and now that's going to pay off because I was getting him dirt cheap, and now he's like 3 or 4 rounds earlier. So check that out, and we'll go over some more values. There's tons left. Make that deposit. Use the promo code SEEK. It's on the screen. Really easy to do. First-time depositors are going to get that $100 match using the promo code SEEK. So make sure to do that. All right, guys. Good luck.